everyone, it's Janice, host of the Divorcing Religion podcast. Thanks for tuning into my show, whether you're joining me on audio or video. I've heard from some folks recently who have told me just how much the show has meant, and some of them have even found it not only to be life-changing, but life-saving, as they felt there was no one else who understood what they were going through, and they found the Divorcing Religion podcast, and they started feeling encouraged. Please help me keep my show on the air. Become a member by clicking the join button on the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. My guest today is international journalist and author Anke Richter, who is based out of Christchurch, New Zealand. In 2022, HarperCollins published Anke's best-selling book called Cult Trip: Inside the World of Coercion and Control. It's a gripping and disturbing read and was released in the United States in May. Anke spent over 10 years investigating the trauma of former children in cults and eventually came too close, which left a mark, while she dabbled in some neo-tantra groups herself. Her research and personal quest highlights how cults seduce and trap and destroy otherwise ordinary people, and what the line is between participant and perpetrator, and seduction and sexual abuse. In addition to being a journalist and best-selling author, Anke is a member and co-founder of F.A.C.T, which stands for Fight Against Conspiracy Theories. She's also the convener and director of DeCult, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening this October. I also have it on good authority that a documentary is in the works about DeCult. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast, Anke Richter.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's great to be here with you.
It's amazing. I'm in Canada, you're in New Zealand, and we can see and hear each other just clear as a bell. Technology is a wonderful thing.
It is. Zoom is our best friend these days, right?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, really. It became my best friend during COVID. That's for sure. I'm wondering about if you would start us off telling us a little bit about your background. We know that you're an international journalist and now a best-selling author as well. Was religion or high demand groups or cults, was that a part of your past or your growing up experience at all?
Not really, not in the sense that I'm a cult survivor or leaver. I grew up in Germany, so I guess that does play a role to a certain degree, because I've been very much raised in the awareness of, of indoctrination, of radicalization, of good people that can do bad things if they're taken in the wrong direction by a charismatic leader, right? Hitler, Germany. So that's very much part of my upbringing and my awareness. And I think I was always fascinated by culty groups. I spent 2 years in Los Angeles, did my training in journalism there. Scientology, Church of Scientology was just around the corner. I walked past their buildings. I saw these people with their Navy-type uniforms in the cafes, actually, and one ended up at a doctor's practice, and she was a Scientologist. So I got a first whiff, and I met some people from that group. And I think I got fascinated early on also because they were very active in Germany at the time. And there was a lot of pushback in the 80s against Scientology because of the reasons I just named before, because I think there's more of an alertness in Germany about groups that could come and do, have an undue influence. And so I had them on my radar, but not so much the other spiritual groups. Definitely, I don't have a churchy background in the sense of a fundamentalist one, but I was a happy participant in youth groups, Protestant, Anglican youth groups. I was even a leader in the YMCA for a while, and ran these groups, sitting around the campfire, singing songs, loving Jesus, and probably also just wanting to have connections with other teenagers and enjoying that. And I think it actually sort of planted a seed early on for a group feeling that I was probably always looking for. Now that you ask me, no one's really asked me this before about my own religious past, because I never, I've met so many people from really strong religious backgrounds that I don't think of myself as having a religious background. But I now remember that I once went to a big summer camp as a teenager for Protestant and Catholic youth. It's called Thésée in France, in a former monastery, very pacifist, very beautiful. And I think I wasn't really there for the religion. I was there for the vibe and the heart opening and the singing and, kissed a boy, all of that. So, these things, I think, all play a role to also understand why I then later on, many years later on, I was actually sucked into a group that had a strong, gave me something of that sort of heartwarming group feeling that I probably had in my early teens, when I've been maybe deep down missing and looking for ever since. So, and then just to wrap it up, came to New Zealand 20 years ago, established myself as a foreign correspondent here. I was never a religious reporter, so I fell into cult journalism, really. And then that's been a very dominant part of my work over the last 10 years, but it's not something that I set out to do. I'm not a cult expert, I'm just a journalist who came too close, really, and got burned and came back and had a few stories to tell. Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about that? So you mentioned earlier getting involved in a group that kind of scratched that itch that you had, about community and these sorts of things. Is that what you mean when you talk about getting too close and getting burned, or was it something else?
Well, it's both, actually. Getting too close and getting burned in the sense of being a journalist who got too close to the subject, because I spent many years researching the trauma of former children from a former sex and therapy cult in New Zealand, Centrepoint, part of the human potential movement. And that had an effect on me, a very detrimental effect on me. I was later diagnosed with PTSD from vicarious trauma from this research. Had to actually stop the book I'd set out to write. I was commissioned for a really good publisher to write this book about Centrepoint, this former commune here. And then I got too entangled and caught up and too affected by the trauma actually that I unearthed and that I hadn't been processed. People who've told me, especially one woman who'd never spoken to anyone her whole life about what happened to her at that community as a child, who was sexually abused. Sorry, I should have given a trigger warning here, but from the age of 10, 11. And, this was a very, very taxing research over many years where I was on my own, where I didn't have colleagues. I didn't even have a commissioning editor at the publishing house anymore, because she'd left soon after she'd signed me up. And I was completely on my own. And I felt I had no one around me who really understood what I was doing, what I'd gotten myself into, apart from the former victims and perpetrators and members. The people that I've interviewed became, some of them became my closest allies, and that's a really slippery slope. And some of the stories were very contradicting, as you probably know if you look at the aftermath of a former toxic, coercive group like this, especially where people had gone to jail. And Centrepoint, a dozen people had, gone through courts and been arrested and been convicted, including their charismatic leader and 2 women, for sexual child abuse, for manufacturing psychedelic drugs that they took with children and teenagers, and massive group experiments. So, you're going, wow, right? Even on a global scale, that's quite a big thing. And for little New Zealand, it's a pretty peaceful place down under, where not much happens that the world really takes notice of. So this was a massive shock to New Zealand in the 80s and then the 90s, when the court cases and convictions happened. But since then, it wasn't really processed in any way. And not that I'm not a therapist. I hadn't set out to do, group reconciliation work like some experts can do it, who are trained in this or who are recovery specialists. I'm none of that. I hadn't even really done sexual abuse reporting. And here was thrown in at the deep end, getting completely lost, but being empathetic and also being, an investigative journalist, and then also having this background of wanting to understand more than just the crime story. I wanted to understand who were those people who went there in the first place, who set up the commune, who took their children there, who I don't even want to say who let their children be abused, because I don't think they chose that either, who were coerced into accepting that there was an ideology that they, you know how it works with a frog in boiling water, where by the time you realize the water is boiling and you're burning, it's too late to jump out, right? And so I only learned all the complexities of a community like that. I only learned this through meeting people afterwards who hadn't spoken about it, or who were stuck in their affections, fighting each other actually over their version of the truth. And I had no idea that I mean, it was a cesspool, it was a hornet's nest, and it was a labyrinth that I got lost in. So that's the first part of coming to close. And the other part, but you asked this before. Yeah, absolutely. I think I also got lost in some ways and got too close when I dove into the conscious sexuality world. And interestingly enough, that happened at about the same time when I was starting the center point research. Or actually, no, I had already dabbled in some of these courses. I went to a festival, a Tantra festival, Neo-Tantra festival in Byron Bay. And actually, I met a woman there from Centrepoint who had lived there as a teenager. And she told me her story. And this was actually how the whole Centrepoint research kicked off. And interestingly enough, at the same time, while I was suddenly getting quite interested in groups that were actually not that different from what Centrepoint had maybe set out to be, namely, a place that can heal people and where they can open up their relationships or explore, their sexual desires and be more authentic and have really loving relationships. And all this stuff wasn't weird to me at the time, because I thought, yeah, actually, there's stuff out there that I could learn too. And I was suddenly becoming interested in that. After being, of course, as a journalist, you were cynical. I mean, for decades, I was always super cynical and about the whole esoteric New Age field. Wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. And all of a sudden, there was at this festival and had a few friends, and probably because there was something in my life at the time where that could land. Middle-aged woman, lots of personal reasons, but suddenly it's like, actually, maybe these people there have an answer. And I think this also opened the door for me for the Centrepoint research at the time, because I wasn't just looking at it as a crime reporter, what have these awful people done? And look at these weirdos in this cult. It was more like, well, I'm drawn to something that's a little bit left field maybe for mainstream society, because it's around, living a holistic sexuality or exploring, whatever it is. It's kind of hard for me to find those words without sounding too woo-woo, right? And using that jargon. But I think because I came with this open mind of wanting to understand what actually went wrong, how did this utopian dream turn into such a collective nightmare? And I love intentional communities. We have a lot of them here in New Zealand. Most of them are really healthy, lovely places. Some are a bit run down, but not all of them. Most of them are not cultic communities. So, I have a lot of I have a lot of love for these intentional alternative communities and for alternative lifestyles. And, I probably count myself more to that world and to the very, straight mainstream, bit of both, right? So this is how it all started. So at the same time, while I was researching Centrepoint, I also got drawn into this world. And it was actually ISTA, International School of Temple Arts. It's quite a mouthful for what it is. And it's a movement that at the time I didn't really see as cultic. Of course, you never see what you're into as cultic. You can spot it.
Nobody joins a cult.
No,
everyone joins a good thing.
And funny enough, and I don't know if I'm sure you've come across this before, people in groups like that, and that included me at the time, are very good at spotting it in other groups, though. And they're always very excited when they find another group that's kind of doing the same thing, but they're definitely more culty. And then, oh, yeah, but they're the bad ones. Oh, my God, we would never do it like them. Thank God we're not like that, right? And there's a massive blind spot where it's like, yeah, maybe you're not doing that and maybe not as extreme, but yeah. So I was very blind to a lot of the dynamics that were happening, basically, mainly the the harem culture in Ista, the transgressions. I mean, this was also more than 10 years ago. That's not an excuse, but it was before the Me Too movement. It was before I think my awareness for groups like that was even there. So I was already dabbling in a very culty group that probably got more culty over the time, I think, and didn't know much about cults at the time because my research and everything only started later. So, and then there came a time a few years in where more and more scandals and exposés about the neo-tantra world, about abusive gurus and so on came to light. And I'd actually done one myself. I went to Thailand in 2019 and helped to blow Agama yoga out of the water. So that's a tantric yoga cult that's been in the news. I mean, The Guardian was the other outlet. I was the only reporter there on the ground. 31 women had filed complaints about sexual abuse by the yoga teachers and the guru himself. It's a Romanian guru, and the backdrop to this whole outfit there, which is still running, unfortunately, on Koh Phangan in Thailand, is the absolutely horrific sex trafficking, alleged sex trafficking cult, Misa, Atman Yoga, that's Tara Yoga in the UK, and Nata Yoga in Scandinavia, and Dati in Germany, and their guru, Gregorian Bivolara, was just arrested in Paris last year for sex trafficking. Just throwing that in for good measure to give you an idea how a lovely looking yoga center on a tropical island in Thailand is actually basically one of the arms of, or one of the offsprings of one of the most horrific sex cults in the world that we're going to hear more about. Anyway, I went there, I reported about it, was a big story, and I think it was a turning point for me as well, because I was suddenly looking at my own tribe. I mean, I really don't like this word anymore, but at the time that's the word they still use, right? It was the tribe. I was looking at my own, tribe with very critical eyes and thinking, hang on, a lot of these dynamics are playing out here too. If they don't watch themselves, they're going to end up like Agama Yoga. And I still saw myself as someone like a wanderer between the worlds who could come and warn them and maybe give them, say, hey, guys, I've just researched all this. Are you aware that maybe you could face a massive public scandal too if some things don't get better here, or some people don't step back. And no one was open to hearing this. Surprise at the time. I was still idealistic, and I think I still am. It's still really, this is what I mean with coming to close. It's still hard for me to really unpack what they are and who they are and what they do, because I was too close. So I have a lot of empathy for people who can't just walk away from their own group and go, oh, this is what it is, and this is what we did, and this is really bad. It takes time. And I mean, I was never a victim there. I wasn't hurt. I was definitely and I was definitely an enthusiastic follower. And I mean, needless to say, of course, I at the time, I did a lot of things that I thought were fantastic for me and really helped me. And maybe they were, maybe they did. I mean, that's true for every cultic group, right? But it's really helped me to understand how, even on that low level of involvement that I actually had, and how I never broke off with my family, or I didn't live in a compound. I didn't, it wasn't extreme, and still there is a sense of transition, of loss, of coming to terms with rewriting the history of what that was for you, of having to speak up about former friends because they're actually enablers of something that needs to change, and then also still being fair, it's complex. So this is the other part, long answer, the other part of coming too close. So it's those two parts, as a journalist and as a participant.
Wow. It's incredible. You have been through so much. You have also witnessed so much. Would you tell us how you were able to recognize or help yourself? What helped you see that you were too close? Was it you started recognizing some PTSD symptoms from the vicarious PTSD? Were you having nightmares, or something just made you go, wait, I have to take a step back from this project?
Wow. Look, I mean, it was 2 hard years. It was a hard slog. It was, not nightmares, but my body was reacting. I was waking up, early in the mornings. I couldn't sleep. It was just like this heavy, dark cloud hanging over me, having to go back into this again and again on my rounds of interviews. And then a friend died in a car crash. A very close friend died in a car crash. And I was in deep, deep grief. And that's actually when, in some ways it gave me perspective on the project too, that I thought, I just can't do this for now. I just can't take on more heaviness and darkness. I'm in my own grief. I need to process that. And then going back into it again was I just hit a point where I couldn't. And how did I realize this PTSD? I mean, I didn't really. It was actually more when I actually went and saw a therapist, and then later on, I was actually diagnosed with that, because some of the reactions I was having, and I still feel this sometimes. It's just overwhelm. It's really this extreme overwhelm and this fear of the darkness of this. Like, whoa, there's so much. How am I going to get through it? And I don't want to dwell on it too much, because I feel almost like it's not fair, because the real trauma is with the people who've experienced these awful things, not me, the reporter. I was just doing my job, right? And maybe it's kind of on me as well that I didn't have supervision at the time, or, I don't want to go into too much self-pity about, I chose this project, right? And maybe to some degree, I wouldn't say I was naive, but I wasn't really prepared for it. And but it's just, I'm just saying this not to, as a poor me thing, but more to highlight how immensely awful these experiences of those who've left Centrepoint, and also Gloriabell, another, we can talk about, a religious one, how heavy that is, and how lasting, and how ongoing, and how, that I got only just glimpses into lives that are still destroyed by addiction, by prostitution, by broken up families, by suicide attempts. And just to get a little glimpse of that. And then I'm lucky, I could always retreat back into my safe life and come back home and just be very grateful that I have a, functioning, wonderful family and a safe job, and, I'm financially secure and all these things, and meeting all these people who don't have that just because they were in the wrong place as children, as teenagers at the wrong time, and their parents made that choice. And so the PTSD is really just my vicarious, my PTSD from vicarious trauma is just a reflection of the bigger trauma behind it all that I just got a little glimpse of. And I try to give these people a voice and be a channel, and that rubbed off on me. But let's really, let's save our compassion here for those who, who told me their stories. And I'm so grateful still that they trusted me. Yeah. And it wasn't always easy, because, sometimes I got to wear that journalist hat and be quite hard-nosed and just, quite sort of, functional in the sense of, oh, this works, this doesn't work, these are we got to change a quote. Are you okay? And it's a fine line to walk, to produce something that's a good read in the end, and can hold up to, journalistic and publishing standards, but also not use people. And especially with those who've come, especially those women who've experienced sexual abuse. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I do know now that, there's a they're highly sensitive to someone having control over them again, or to being not in control. And they've often, they've usually been indoctrinated, even though they've left their cult persona behind, but there could still be a part of them that learned early on, you can't trust the media. Journalists are just out there to manipulate you. They're just using you, and I came up with this, against this, even with those who trusted me, gave me their stories. Sometimes I flipped back into this thinking. And so, that was a lot to handle. Yeah.
Wow. And so you used one of my favorite words there, indoctrination, because I frequently run into people online who express frustration and are very judgmental regarding those who have been caught up in a high demand group or religion, and they'll say, oh, those people are crazy, or they're not very bright. And I immediately step in. No, the only thing about that person is that they've been indoctrinated, and every human being on this planet is vulnerable during a time of transition, during a time in their life. We are all vulnerable to indoctrination, especially if
100%.
we're going through something. Yes, or if you're a teenager, you're just figuring out your identity. If you're a child and you're trusting adults to tell you the truth. If you're an adult and you've had to move to a new city, or you've lost a job, or you've lost a partner, you're not on your flat footing, you're kind of on your heels instead. And along comes a group, and they're going to love bomb, and they're going to promise you the answer. And then even if we look around in the world right now, things seem a little bit crazy. A lot of tension going on in the world right now, and people want answers and they want to feel safe. I say that people really crave certainty, security, order, and acceptance. And conspiracy theories, religions, and cults tie that up with a nice shiny red ribbon. They offer all those things. And so that's how even really intelligent people, even people you would never imagine, even just wonderful people who want to change the world. And I know this is how Scientology draws a lot of just hopeful young people in. They want to change the world, and Scientology promised them that's what they're going to do. So we're all vulnerable at some time.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you just brought up conspiracy theories as well, because I think COVID, the pandemic, has shown us how vulnerable so many people are who before then, led their normal lives and didn't seem extreme, or down the rabbit hole in any way. And all of a sudden, it's almost like you looked around, you think, boom, this one, boom, this one. We have, well-known broadcasters, and we've seen celebrities, we've seen people. It's not about their intelligence, not about their whether they're lost and poor and whatever, or isolated. We've seen people who have big social networks or whatever, and they've fallen into, in indoctrination, exactly like you said. So look at, I mentioned my German background before. Look at whole countries that can get indoctrinated. If the right leader and the right, comes along at the right time, promising the right thing, no one's immune to it. And I'm really glad you're saying this. I was actually on stage last night here in Christchurch, a live recording for the Guilty Feminist show, and I only had a few minutes to say a few things, but this is actually what I just really wanted to say, that because I come across this again and again. I give a lot of talks at the moment at Rotary clubs just to fundraise for this charity I started, DeCult. We're organizing the first cut conference, we're crowdfunding, we need some money, so I go to Rotary clubs and speak there and hope that they open their pockets, right? Old white men, I'm sorry, but this is where often the money is here in these cities. And it's such interesting when I go there, and there's chuckles and cults and we can't, there's all this mansplaining and cultsplaining and jokes and whatnot, and then I give them my my presentation, and 20 half an hour later you can see how maybe the pennies dropped a bit, or there's a bit of a change. The first thing I always tell them, look, you're here as a club. You meet once a week because you want to do good in the world, because you want to help others. This is why I'm here talking to you. And I look around you, you're no different from people who find themselves in cultic groups. Is actually the best, I really think the best qualities in people are the ones that bring them into cults. And this is often why, I love people who've come out of cult. They're some of the best people in the world, because I often find, they've gone in there with the best intention in the first place, and then the courage and everything that it takes then to actually step out, do the hard work yards, come out of it all, and then still, stand up and do some activism or some public education. I have so much respect. Yeah, these are my people. Even though I've never been, I'm not a cult leaver, but I look at them and I think these are cool people doing good stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we know that a lot of people, when they picture a cult, they're picturing Jim Jones and the People's Temple, or they're, people brainwashed and living on a compound, this sort of thing. But there can be a cult of two. It can be a dynamic that's a cultic dynamic in a relationship. There are family cults. It can
life
be,
coaching.
cults are many different sizes and shapes. And so I'm always pointing people to the work of Janja Lalich, who I know will be speaking at DeCult, Steve Hassan and his BITE model, which is a wonderful way for people to kind of explore and be aware of if the group they're looking at or the relationship may be kind of culty. So he breaks it down. He says behavior, information, thoughts, emotions. That's the BITE model. If someone or a group is trying to control or influence you in these areas, you need to be aware of it. Rick Allen Ross has a cult education website, and he spoke at the conference on religious trauma. Dr. Marlene Winnell, of course, she wrote her book, Leaving the Fold, and she is one of the pioneers of religious trauma recovery work, and Dr. Daryl Ray of Recovering from Religion. So in my world that I exist in, there's a lot of crossover with these people. And also we know that trauma is subjective. So two people can walk down the street and witness a terrible car accident, and one person just says, wow, that's awful, and they go off to work and they don't think about it again. And the other person falls to their knees and it needs to be taken to the hospital. It depends on many other factors that are going on in a person's life at the same time as to whether or not they have been traumatized by an event. So that's something also that a lot of people don't understand, and that can contribute to the factions you were talking about earlier, where some people feel very strongly, no, this was terrible, this was controlling and manipulative, and other people don't see it that way. So it's kind of a complicated situation.
The factions are really interesting that good that you're mentioning it, because I'm becoming aware of that more and more. I mean, I was really aware of it with Centerpoint, obviously, but at the time I didn't really know much about any other cults, so I hadn't been active in the cultiverse or the, anti-cult activist space and so on. And with Centerpoint, it was so difficult to break through the walls, or through the doors really of some of these factions where the walls were up. And even, especially some of the former children who you would think that they were the ones who'd be so keen and come and talk to me, but actually wasn't like that. They were very much entrenched in their family's narrative, and there was a narrative that everything that happened at Centerpoint was good, even though we now know 3%, every third child there was sexually abused or likely to have been sexually abused. It was established by a study that was done here from a university about 14 years ago. So even though, you'd know that every third child there, and probably more kids didn't have a good experience, because there was also neglect and there was other forms of abuse, not just the sexual abuse. And still, there was this faction of former children who did not want to. The word was out, oh, there's a journalist, we don't talk to her, because they were also protecting their parents. Their parents had gone to jail. They had enough, to deal with in their families, just to, there was also all the shame of being associated with that place, which the dirty commie kids and. So that was the first time I really learned about these factions and how isolated some people were who dared to speak up about what, how awful Centerpoint was for them. There wasn't really a group for them at all, but there were sort of groups, not really organized ones, but there were groups or little, networks of people who were still very much part of the old guard. So they had their communities going, but the other ones were dispersed and alone. And then, now there's a project called the Centerpoint Restoration Project, started by Dr. Caroline Ansley, who will also be speaking at the conference. And she came out of the woodwork after I actually had to drop my book, and then I just wrote the making of for a big magazine here, and she read that, and she, it took the lid off her own experience as a kid. And, fast forward all these years, and she participated in a documentary that I also worked, so a few things have come out of all this. But speaking of factions, I'm also aware now that with my own group, so to speak, ISTA, or the group that I was in or close to, I can also now see how there are different groups of activists having different approaches. And there's one, faction well, they're not exactly saying burn them down, but they're saying let's boycott the venues, let's contact the venues where they're holding courses, let's expose what they're doing, let's expose how shoddy their accountability processes are, and that their predators are still out and about and haven't really done anything that shows us that this is stopping. And then there are those who are trying transformative justice, and they've started actually a little group around that called 3SC. And then, and I think both of these approaches, have their place, but then you suddenly see how they are not collaborating, how they're publicly fighting each other and taking each other down. I thought, oh my God, why? Look at where the real problem is. Don't spend all this energy telling each other what the other person or the other group is doing wrong. And then surprise, surprise, I've now also realized with some of the cults that we're going to, be discussing at the conference in October, like, the Jehovah's Witnesses or so, that they're really very opposing factions, and people warning me about this person, and then someone else saying, no, you'll be fine. And, some people saying, but if you invite her, we're going to boycott you, you can't come. And it's really complex. And I'm caught up right in the middle of it, because I can't do, I just have to trust people that I trust. I can't possibly research the whole activist scene of Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance. Yeah, I'm pretty firm in it when it comes to Centerpoint or to ISTA or even Gloriaval. And with Gloriaval, there is really just one group that's doing wonderful work, about this Christian cult that we have here in New Zealand. I don't think they're really fighting factions, maybe because there's only one group and they're doing all the good work, and it would be really hard to criticize what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, what is it with cult leavers and the space where then factions of activists or leavers turn against each other? It's a phenomenon that I've become more aware of, and I'm actually now struggling with, because it's undermining some of the programming for the conference, and it's quite difficult for me, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've really become aware of the factions recently in the ex-Scientology group, because I have some friends who have left, and then they have podcasts of their own. They're very interested in cults and how beliefs forms and how we can protect ourselves. And there's just so much dreadful, painful infighting going on in some of those factions, and so that it leads to some people having to step back and take a break from it, because they feel now that they are being traumatized again by these things that are going on.
Janice, can I ask you, what's your because you're really here, you're the expert here, and I'm just witnessing this phenomenon, but I also need, be good to have your input. Where does that come from? Why is that the case?
Yeah. I think there are different reasons for it. I can tell you one thing that makes sense to me that I've seen in the religious trauma recovery community. So a lot of Christian or Abrahamic groups even can become extremely fundamentalist, radical, pretty much fitting in with the cult dynamic. So if we are raised in fundamentalism, we might be able to get to a point where we recognize the group is unhealthy. I don't believe these things anymore. We can take ourselves out of the fundamentalist group, but it's quite another to take our thinking out of fundamentalism. We still, if we were raised in rigidity and authoritarian things, really binary thinking, it can be very hard for us not to take that with us. And then also, I think this may be potentially more for younger people, but we would talk sometimes in terms of cancel culture and the idea that if this person, I don't agree with what they're saying or doing, and I demand that they change immediately. right now, and I'm going to wield my social media influence like a club. I'm going to beat them into submission and push them out. There's no room for that. But when we do that, we are missing the space for the person. If we actually maybe approach them privately and talk about and have a discussion and say to them, I think what you're doing is potentially really harmful. Here's why. And then we give them some time to evaluate what we've said and to think about it, and then potentially to change course, to recognize, oh yeah, you have a point. But we don't give them that chance because we've beaten them to a bloody pulp, insisting that they change, recant right now. Well, everyone has some degree of ego, right? And people don't respond well when they're backed into a corner and threatened. And so, those are just a couple of things that come to mind for me. And then, of course, some people have agendas that are hidden from us. Sometimes there are people planted in groups to make waves, to cause trouble. And, if that's not the kind of person you are, it's hard to actually come to terms with the fact that sometimes that might be the case, because that's just not how we operate. That's not how we think. So sometimes that can be going on as well, or people have fears. Often when anger comes up, anger is the flip side of fear. So if you think of a little child getting ready to run into traffic, and maybe dad grabs the child and yanks them back and then is saying, "What were you doing?" That is the fear of the parent coming out as anger. And so sometimes we feel threatened by something. We're threatened that we're going to lose something, whether it's our autonomy, whether it's a partner, a job, whatever. And so instead of responding with, wow, I really feel scared about this, we grab onto anger because it feels more powerful and it's easy to access. And so sometimes there's kind of angry words and sparring going on in the groups, but it's not actually about that. It's about something that's underneath that.
That's so interesting and so helpful. And I guess it's also the us versus them. It's almost like the cult thinking that then pops up again. And it's complex. And like I've said, it's how to be discerning. Now, with a conference I'm organizing, we're not attached to any big international organization like ICSO. So we're doing our International Celtic Studies Association, even though they're super supportive of what we're doing. And there's so much, there are so many eyes on us on what we're doing here in little New Zealand for the first time, and I'm not a cult expert. I'm just a journalist with a big network and an enthusiastic instigator, So, and I guess I'm a bit of a trailblazer here in New Zealand for this topic. So I just want to make use of that, but then not to get caught up in these factions and people who've been in this field for years and years now coming in and telling me what to do and what not to do and who to invite and who not to invite. And just to sort of hold my own, but also not. We can't risk to be sued. We can't take legal risks. We can't take reputational risks. And at the same time, I can't vet all of my experts for what they might have said somewhere in the past, or what kind of personalities they have, or whether they're volatile people, in their own rights. It's really, really difficult. So it gives me a better understanding of, this complex world of people with trauma, with agendas, with opinions, with egos, and how to make all this work so that we all get a good dose of cult education here in New Zealand, and also we can also model something to the rest of the world, because we're live streaming this event, so it's not just locally. It's really something where maybe people come together in the same room that you haven't seen before together yet, because of these factions, right? Because of, we only go to this conference, or we only speak to those people, and we're not. I don't want to do this, right? But it's a fine line to walk. So
yeah. Well, I can tell you. So I also am a woman putting on conferences that have never been put on before, and when I have heard from speakers who have said, "Well, I am not willing to speak there because I see you have this person in the lineup and they said this, and this, and maybe they send me screenshots or whatever." then what I've done with that is thank them for passing along that information. And I've reached out directly and privately to the speaker and said, can we please have a conversation about this? And here's what's going on. And I give them room to explain or whatever it is. And I certainly give myself the authority to withdraw or replace speakers as needed as things come up. But yeah, really allowing myself to be curious rather than judgmental. And that's a huge shift that my clients have to make coming out of religious trauma and high demand groups, because we were trained into judgment, to be judgmental, not to be curious. And in fact, curiosity was stamped out of us at a young age to be replaced by obedience the first time, every time. That's how it had to be. So then it feels different as an adult, putting off judgment and inviting curiosity, just sitting with curiosity, because it feels dangerous. Yeah. So it takes time to grow into it.
Right. And it also feels, I mean, we're almost talking like from conference organizer to conference organizer, and you can show me the ropes a bit, but that feels, that's good to hear, right? That you've come up against that as well. And it's not just me, but it has, it's been in the mix, and it just gives you an idea of, how, maybe this is also, just to go back to the PTSD, this is also where that comes up again. Just a little realization here, because back in the Centrepoint days, in those years when I was getting so lost in these factions and this endless sea of information that I had to process, and that was contradicting, and hundreds of pages of court files that I had, and putting it all into a book, and didn't even have legal help at the time. And I think, now people coming to me with a conference where also, there's a deadline, there's something big happening, there's a legal, financial, reputational risk, all of that, and it feels like it's all on me. Maybe this is where the PTSD also shows up, that I feel, oh my God, I might be doing this wrong. I might be getting the wrong end of the stick here. I thought I'd figured this out. I thought I'd figured that session out. I thought I could trust this speaker. And now someone else comes and tells me, you can't, they're terrible, I'm not going to come. And that is, even though it seems very, it's not, it's not nothing terrible, you could change the program, but it does, this is where the PTSD comes in. It just brings up a lot of anxiety and stress around not coping with the load of conflicting information and people's agendas and their hurts and their trauma, and then they're going to attack me, because I was attacked also legally and verbally, and had some very, very uncomfortable situations that I found myself in, which I put in my book actually, back in the Centrepoint days, with bullies, with people who were accused of having abusers at Centrepoint, and they were bullying me too in the way how they treated me. And so I think that's also in the mix. So I feel like I'm having a little therapy session with you today, Janet. But It's all good. Need that every now and then.
Boy, I'm really impressed then, knowing that you also have had people, at least threaten litigation or bully you in these ways. The fact that you still came out with not only your book, but then took it a step further and said, now we're also going to do this conference. And I think part of the issue is potentially we are women, or if we're assigned female at birth, we're presenting as women now. And in patriarchal society, women are not encouraged to be risk takers. We're encouraged to be quiet, be subservient, keep our heads down, do the work, but, don't try and get any of the glory or any attention for yourself, or don't try and be a leader. And the fact of the matter is, you are now in a leadership role. People are looking at you as this best-selling author and now cult convener. That puts you kind of in a different category.
And I didn't quite see that coming, and maybe the turnaround was a bit fast from, publishing that book, because the book, just to give, some context for your listeners, the book that I've the HarperCollins book, Cult Trip, is not the original Centrepoint book. The failed Centrepoint book is in that too. It's about 1/3 condensed, like what I could sort of safely put out, and after a long legal read and all of that. But there's a lot more in there. And then I was actually approached by HarperCollins a few years ago, and they said, "Do you want to, you've done some cult stories, do you want to write about a book about cults?" And I never thought I would do this again, because when I pulled the plug on Centrepoint, for all the reasons I've explained, I thought, this is it. It's a massive failure. I spent 2 years on this. This would have been my first book in English. I've written 3 more in German before, so it was also, professionally, it would have been a milestone, right? My second language, sort of proving myself here in a new country, all of these things, all these ego things too, right? But fair enough, right? Fair enough. And So when Cult Trip, this new book, where the book finally came out, I got messages, emails on a weekly basis, sometimes more often than that, of people here, especially in New Zealand, some in Australia, who said, "Can you help me? I've read your book. I'm so moved by it. I've had a childhood and such." Groups I've never even heard about, the Christchurchians, the 2x2s, and haven't even heard about them by that name. Right. Well, now I know. So many smaller communities, spiritual communities, and they told me, "I grew up in something like that. And I read your book, and can you recommend a therapist for me, or can I tell you my story?" And I thought, no, I can't. First of all, I can't take on any more stories. Mm. I wasn't, researching any more cults the time my book came out. I had other things to do, and I was on book tours and whatnot. I kind of felt like I've wrapped this up. And also, we don't have cult therapists here in New Zealand. We don't have trained recovery specialists like yourself or others. We don't have these experts here. We have some amazing, just 2 really amazing victim advocacy groups. One only just started, 2 years ago, and the other one is the Gloria Valley Support Trust, but they are only here for people who've left the specific Christian fundamentalist cult. So I thought, where do I send these people? I can't even give them, a name of someone who's a therapist for this field here. Excuse me. And this is how the idea, maybe a bit naive and a bit fast at the time, I thought, well, maybe if we just have a conference and all these people can meet each other and talk to each other, and we can bring some experts over, and boom. At least
so simple.
So simple, Janice, right? What was I thinking? And that was, it was 8 months ago. And I've been working nonstop, full-time, unpaid, by the way. Started charity on this project since then. I now have a great team of volunteers. We still have a few gaps to fill. We're currently running a crowdfunding campaign to actually also get a documentary made about this event. So it's more than just a conference. And that all happened very fast. But at the same time, I'm also thinking, let's use the momentum, not just of my book, but also people being outraged here in New Zealand about Gloriavale, because a documentary has actually come out here on television. Gloriavale is nothing new. It's been around for decades, but now finally, thanks to the power of good media, of good films, of good documentaries, people are finally talking about and going, hang on, how can this be happening here? So I think it's great that we have this conference coming up, and there's a lot of public interest, media interest, people coming from around the world. I hope we can fit them all in, because we can only, get so many people on bums on seats, but it's going to be live streamed. So I hope it's a game changer, and that after that, some, especially professionals and government agencies and stakeholders, to use the marketing jargon that I'm now learning with all this, will be talking to each other and actually realizing that there is a problem, and that we need properly trained people in New Zealand, and that we need an anti-cult agency. So you already mentioned Janja Lalich, so she's going to come and speak with politicians after the conference. We have a dinner with her at Parliament, actually. It's a real honor. Yeah, she's going to be...
How exciting.
Shopped around. We do everything to get her speaking engagements at universities. She's holding lectures. Jilly Jacobson is an amazing therapist we're bringing over, and she's introducing cult recovery therapy in New Zealand. We have additional workshops after the conference. And another person I'm super excited about is Ulrike Schießer from the Federal Bureau of Cult Affairs in Vienna. She's an amazing psychotherapist and runs that government-funded office. And I think that's a great model for what we should have here in New Zealand, what many countries should have. I don't know if you actually have that in Canada. It's not, most of these organizations are not government funded, but they should be, we have a great agency in New Zealand against sexual abuse, and they do prevention and they do therapy, and the same for drug abuse and so on. So we need that for cultic abuse and cult prevention. So bringing Ulrike over to basically, show the Kiwis the ropes, so to speak, how to do this. And also she is she's been dealing, like most of these agencies, there are a few of those agencies in Germany as well. I spoke to the one in Berlin last year, and they told me that since COVID, about half of their work these days, it's still going, is with people or families of people who've fallen down the rabbit hole into extreme conspiracy theories.
Yes.
So interesting, right? That crossover that the anti-cult agencies that were started, years ago, decades ago, because of groups like Scientology or Evangelist or so on, are now also dealing with a conspiracy problem. And Ulrike from Vienna has actually written a book about that, how to talk to, conspiracy believers. And so, yeah, I'm super excited. We'll have a panel with her also on, about conspiracy theories, and we'll have a panel about kids and cults and Jehovah's Witnesses and Gloria Val. Rainbow rights, again, a big topic I think we need to tackle, because there's so much homophobia coming out of cults, happening in cults. And here in New Zealand, we're just seeing it in full swing at the moment with Destiny Church. It's a small sort of outfit run by a Maori a pastor, apostle, and they are extremely homophobic, and they've been basically shouting down drag queens and having them cancelled from their story times at libraries, and they were painting over rainbow crossings. And New Zealand is a very queer-friendly country, right? And very egalitarian and progressive in this sense. And so, I want to address that too, that we, some cults are not just harming their members, they're also doing harm to society and what they're propagating. Yep.
Yeah. And unfortunately that we have those issues in Canada as well. And I also just want to point people to that statement I made earlier, if people are really expressing anger about something, say like someone who's coming across as very homophobic, underneath that, on some level, there's fear. There's fear about something. So if we can manage, when we're talking people, to tap into that, to understand what that fear is, it's much easier for us to have compassion for them, and for us then potentially to have a conversation, because it brings the temperature down, brings the anger level down. I'm so excited for the work that you're doing. I wish that I could attend your conference. I can't wait to hear how it goes. And in our show notes from our conversation today, we'll include links for your book and for the conference, and of course also about the documentary, because you're doing some crowdfunding for that. Is there anything else that you'd like to say today before you and I say goodbye?
I'm excited that there is so much awareness now about these topics, especially cult media. Look at all the great documentaries that have come out lately. So I think there is a real momentum happening. And yes, there is also voyeurism there, and people grab their popcorn to watch another cult doco. But I think if we can do this with the right awareness and the right compassion and integrity, and produce media that can, on the one hand, maybe feed the voyeurism, but at the same time give people a good dose of the real issues and the real topics, that's what I'm really into. And I'm also passionate about creatives who've come out of cults. Like last night, Deborah Frances White from The Guilty Feminist, big shout out to her. She's done a whole comedy show once at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival about her past as a teenager or a young person in the Jehovah's Witness. So we're bringing Scott Homan over from the US, who's made a great film called Witness Underground about musicians who were in Jehovah's Witness. So just to say, I'd love to see more of that, of artistic expressions, instead of just, producing more trauma porn. I don't think we need that. I mean, we need the professional dealing with this, but we don't need to feed any voyeurism, but to also bring people together. And this is what I want to stand for, what I want to create with DeCult in New Zealand. Maybe a new approach besides academia, besides therapy, where all these things come together, but together also with artists, with musicians, with filmmakers, where we look at this issue and stop just treating it like a fringe thing that only, for weird people. No, it's something that needs to be brought into middle society.
Beautiful.
That's my mission
Thank
statement.
you so
Thanks
much.
for giving
Boy,
me,
I'm going to get my pom-poms out.
Thanks
so
for giving
exciting.
me the space to say this, Janice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure having you here. I'm going to ask you to stay on the line with me just for one more moment. And everyone else, I'll let you go. Thanks for joining us today. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.